Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, April 1st, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today features a high of 67.9 degrees and a low of 58 degrees. Since it is April 1st, be prepared for some lighthearted fun, as it is April Fool's Day. On today's program, we will investigate how a hidden digital trail could potentially derail the climate agenda of the Trump administration. We are also diving into the underlying motives regarding the push to integrate private equity and cryptocurrency into 401k retirement accounts. Aside from those deep dives, we have several other important stories to cover to get you fully updated on current events. All this and more coming up on Alex's News, so stay tuned. We start this morning with an investigation that's raising serious questions about who's really writing the rules at the Environmental Protection Agency. ProPublica has uncovered evidence that a top EPA official may have ghostwritten the oil industry's playbook against methane regulations before joining the agency and putting those very ideas into action. Our reporter, Ethan, has been following this story. Ethan, walk us through what ProPublica found.
So the investigation, reported by Alex Quadros, centers on a man named Aaron Szabo. He's the EPA's assistant administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation, which means he has direct authority over methane and greenhouse gas rules. What ProPublica discovered is buried in the digital metadata of a January 2022 letter that the American Exploration and Production Council sent to the EPA, objecting to Biden-era climate regulations. That letter was presented as an outside industry critique, but the metadata identifies Szabo as one of its primary authors. At the time, he was working as a private sector lobbyist.
So the metadata is essentially a digital fingerprint showing he wrote the letter?
Exactly. And it's not just that he wrote it years ago and moved on. The letter laid out a very specific blueprint for rolling back methane rules. According to ProPublica, the word burdensome appears 10 times in the document to describe methane requirements. It pushed for less frequent well monitoring and cheaper leak detection technologies. Now, as a high-ranking official under EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin, Szabo is leading the charge to adopt those exact positions as official government policy.
That sounds like textbook regulatory capture. Is that what legal experts are calling it?
That's precisely the term they're using. Regulatory capture is when an agency that's supposed to protect the public ends up advancing the interests of the industry it oversees. In Szabo's case, you've got what critics call a perfect storm. He served in the first Trump administration at the Council on Environmental Quality and the Office of Management and Budget, then left government to lobby for companies like Ovintiv and the American Petroleum Institute, and now he's back in government implementing the arguments he crafted for those clients. Public Citizen and Earth Justice have both pointed to this as one of the most documented examples of the revolving door they've ever seen.
And there's a Project 2025 connection here too, right?
There is. Critics argue that Szabo's involvement in the Heritage Foundation's Mandate for Leadership, which is Project 2025, shows he entered the EPA with a predetermined agenda. The argument is that he didn't come in to weigh the evidence and make impartial decisions. He came in with a deregulatory roadmap that he'd already helped write for the industry. That's a significant legal vulnerability because federal rulemaking is supposed to involve genuine consideration of the facts and public comments.
How does this connect to the bigger fight over the endangerment finding?
This is where it gets really consequential. The 2009 endangerment finding is the legal foundation for all federal greenhouse gas regulation. It's the ruling that says these emissions endanger public health and welfare. The EPA finalized a repeal of that finding on February 12th of this year, and it's set to take effect on April 20th, so less than 3 weeks from now. A coalition of 24 states and 10 cities, led by New York and California, is challenging that repeal in court.
And the Szabo revelations are now part of that legal challenge?
They're central to it. The challengers are arguing the rescission is arbitrary and capricious under the Administrative Procedure Act. According to reports from Earth Justice, the metadata serves as evidence that the EPA's decision wasn't based on reasoned analysis or new science. It was, in their words, a foregone conclusion dictated by industry lobbyists. That's a powerful argument, because the Administrative Procedure Act requires agencies to show their work and demonstrate genuine deliberation.
Has the EPA changed its legal strategy in response to any of this pressure?
It has, and that shift is telling. ProPublica reports that the EPA initially tried to dispute climate science itself, relying on a controversial Department of Energy report. But in the final version of the rule, the agency dropped that scientific argument entirely. Instead, it pivoted to a narrow legal interpretation, claiming the Clean Air Act only allows regulation of local and regional pollution, not global emissions like greenhouse gases. They're leaning heavily on what's called the Major Questions Doctrine and the Supreme Court's West Virginia versus EPA precedent. Legal scholars say that pivot suggests the agency realized its scientific case wouldn't hold up.
What about formal ethics complaints? Has anyone taken official action?
Several groups have. Earth Justice and Public Citizen have filed formal complaints with both the EPA's Office of Inspector General and the Office of Government Ethics. Their argument is that Szabo violated federal ethics pledges by failing to recuse himself from matters he previously lobbied on. The Center for Biological Diversity has gone a step further and filed legal motions demanding his immediate recusal from all methane-related rulemakings. These aren't just symbolic gestures. If the Inspector General finds merit, it could trigger a formal investigation with real consequences.
And Congress is paying attention too?
Democratic members of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, led by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, have called for a formal investigation. Their focus is on Szabo's March 2025 confirmation hearings. They say he failed to disclose the full extent of his authorship of the AXPC letter. If that's true, it raises questions about whether he was forthcoming with senators who were deciding whether to confirm him. That's a serious allegation in its own right, separate from the policy questions.
What's happening in the courts right now?
On February 18th, environmental groups filed a petition for review in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. The court has since consolidated multiple petitions into a single case. The Szabo metadata and his Project 2025 authorship are central exhibits in that litigation. If the D.C. Circuit finds that his involvement constituted a fundamental breakdown of impartial rulemaking, it could issue what's called a vacatur. That would be a total cancellation of the administration's deregulatory actions, essentially freezing the EPA's efforts to reshape climate policy.
Has Szabo or anyone at the EPA responded to the investigation?
Notably, no. When ProPublica reached out, Szabo declined to answer specific questions and directed the reporter to the EPA's communications staff. The agency put out a boilerplate statement about unleashing American energy and providing clean air, land, and water for every American. But it didn't address the conflict of interest allegations at all. The American Exploration and Production Council has also declined to comment on the metadata identifying Szabo as the author of their 2022 letter. That silence is pretty conspicuous given the gravity of the accusations.
Now, some conservatives have pushed back by pointing to the Biden administration's own revolving door. Is that a fair comparison?
It's a comparison that's being made, and it deserves some context. Critics point to officials like Tomas Carbonell, who moved from the Environmental Defense Fund to the EPA, and Patrice Sims, who came from Earth Justice. Both implemented regulations they'd previously advocated for in the private sector. However, organizations like ProPublica and Public Citizen argue there's a fundamental distinction. The Biden-era appointments involve people moving from nonprofit advocacy for public goods like clean air into government. The Szabo case involves a paid corporate lobbyist moving into a role where he's dismantling protections he was hired to oppose. Whether courts see that distinction as legally meaningful remains to be seen.
So what are you watching for in the next few weeks?
The big date is April 20th. That's when the endangerment finding repeal is set to take effect. The legal challengers are likely to seek an emergency stay from the D.C. Circuit before then. If the court grants it, the repeal would be frozen while the case plays out, which could take months or even years. The ethics complaints with the Inspector General and the Office of Government Ethics are also worth watching. And frankly, the silence from Szabo and the EPA can't last forever. At some point, they'll have to address these allegations on the record, especially as the court case moves forward.
A lot to keep an eye on. Ethan, thanks for breaking that down for us.
Happy to do it, Grace.
We turn now to a major development in retirement policy. 2 days ago, the Trump administration rolled out a proposal that could change what's inside your 401k. Chloe, what exactly is the Department of Labor proposing here?
So the DOL unveiled a new rule called fiduciary duties in selecting designated investment alternatives. In plain English, it's designed to make it easier for 401k plans and other workplace retirement accounts to offer things like private equity, private credit, and even cryptocurrency. Fox Business reports this stems directly from an executive order President Trump signed back in August of last year. That order was titled Democratizing Access to Alternative Assets for 401k Investors, so this has been in the works for months.
And this is essentially a reversal of where the Biden administration stood on these kinds of investments, right?
That's exactly right. Back in 2022, the Biden DOL specifically warned plan managers about the volatility of digital assets and discouraged including them. This new proposal flips that approach entirely. Instead of discouraging these assets, the Trump administration is building a legal framework to encourage them. It's one of the sharpest policy reversals we've seen in the retirement space in years.
So how does the rule actually work? What's the mechanism that makes plan managers more comfortable offering these riskier options?
The centerpiece is something called a process-based safe harbor. As wealthmanagement.com and the law firm Proskauer have reported, this essentially gives plan managers a legal shield. Historically, the employers and advisors who pick investment options for 401k plans have stayed far away from alternative assets. They were terrified of lawsuits under ERISA, the 1974 law that governs retirement plans. This safe harbor says that if a manager follows a specific analytical process, they're presumed to have met their legal duties. Critics have called it legal immunity.
What does that analytical process look like?
Managers would have to evaluate 6 specific factors before adding an alternative asset. They'd need to assess anticipated long-term performance compared to traditional investments, conduct a thorough analysis of fees, examine whether the asset can be converted to cash when a worker needs a distribution, evaluate how the asset is priced since these don't trade on public exchanges, identify appropriate benchmarks to measure success, and understand the unique risks and operational complexity involved. It's detailed on paper, but the question is whether it truly protects workers or just protects the managers who offer these products.
Let's talk about the why behind this. Is there an economic reason the administration is pushing this now?
There is, and it's a big one that doesn't get enough attention. Reports from financialcontent.com and investing.com show that the private equity industry entered 2026 facing what analysts are calling a liquidity reckoning. Roughly $3.7 trillion in assets are currently trapped inside private companies. These firms are waiting for exits through IPOs or mergers that just aren't happening at the pace they need. On top of that, the big institutional investors like pension funds have hit what's being called institutional saturation.
What does that saturation actually mean in practice?
It means the traditional big money buyers are pulling back. By early this year, about 25% of large institutional partners had already cut their private equity allocations. So the usual customers for these products are saying no thanks, or at least not as much. That creates a real problem for firms sitting on trillions in assets they need to sell. They need new buyers, and that's where the critics say everyday retirement savers come in.
And that's where we get into the exit liquidity argument. Walk us through that criticism.
This is probably the sharpest criticism of the entire proposal. According to Democracy Now! And the Private Equity Stakeholder Project, the rule is essentially designed to funnel fresh money from the $14 trillion 401k market into Wall Street's hands. The argument goes like this. Sophisticated smart money is fleeing these illiquid investments. So the administration is opening the door for firms like Blackstone, Apollo Global Management, and KKR to offload underperforming or so-called zombie assets onto regular workers saving for retirement. Dennis Kelleher, the CEO of Better Markets, warned that the safe harbor actually incentivizes advisors to pitch what he called toxic products that could become, quote, ticking time bombs, end quote, for millions of retirees.
Are the performance numbers backing up those concerns?
They are, at least based on what's been submitted during the public comment period. The private equity stakeholder project analyzed 15 large evergreen private equity funds and found a median return of about 12% in 2025. That sounds decent until you compare it to the MSCI All-Country World Index, which returned over 22%. So these private equity products delivered roughly half of what a broadly available public market index did, and that's before you even get to fees, which is a whole other problem.
How bad is the fee gap?
It's striking. A standard S&P 500 index fund can cost as little as 0.03% in annual fees. Private equity vehicles, according to the data submitted, often carry expense ratios between 3.76% and 5%. Better Markets argues that gap could drain more than $100,000 from a typical worker's retirement balance over a 30-year career. So even if these products occasionally match public market returns, the fees could quietly eat away at a worker's nest egg for decades.
Now, the cryptocurrency piece has drawn a lot of attention too. Why is that so controversial?
It's controversial in large part because of who stands to benefit personally. PBS and the Economic Policy Institute report that the Trump family owns several cryptocurrency ventures. The most prominent is World Liberty Financial, or WLFI, along with various Trump-branded meme coins. A Trump-affiliated entity called DT Marks DeFi LLC reportedly owns 60% of the WLFI platform. So you've got a sitting president whose family has direct financial stakes in the very asset class his administration is trying to funnel retirement money into.
And ethics watchdogs have been vocal about this, I imagine?
Extremely vocal. Investment News reports that the rule could potentially push more than $100 billion in new capital from 401k accounts into the crypto market. That kind of inflow would significantly inflate token values, including the president's personal holdings. Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have labeled this, quote, open corruption, end quote, questioning whether an administration can maintain integrity when it profits directly from its own regulatory changes. This also comes after the SEC, under Trump-appointed chair Paul Atkins, declared that meme coins are not securities, which effectively clears them to enter retirement portfolios.
So how is the financial industry itself responding? Are the big retirement plan providers on board?
It's a mixed picture. Empower, one of the largest record keepers, officially applauded the rule and praised what it called an investment-neutral approach. But Vanguard and Fidelity have been more cautious. Vanguard is reportedly exploring partnerships to build private equity-focused target date funds, but Fidelity has historically been hesitant without clearer ERISA protections. Meanwhile, Wall Street is clearly optimistic. Shares of Blackstone, Apollo, and Carlyle all rose between 4% and 5% after the announcement, which tells you the market sees a massive new pool of retail capital opening up.
Where does the rule stand right now in terms of the process?
It's currently in a 60-day public comment period. The deadline for submissions is June 1st, and comments need to be identified by the regulatory number RIN 1210AC38. Legal experts from Fisher Phillips and Mayer Brown have noted something interesting, though. While the rule creates a legal pathway, the strict due diligence requirements of that six-factor test may actually prevent the floodgates from opening right away. Many fiduciaries are still going to be cautious about the inherent risks of these complex, illiquid assets.
So even with the safe harbor, we might not see an immediate rush?
That's the expectation among legal analysts. The safe harbor reduces the legal risk, but it doesn't eliminate it entirely. A fiduciary who does a sloppy evaluation could still face litigation. The real question is what happens after the comment period closes and whether the final rule tightens or loosens those requirements. The next 2 months of public feedback could shape the retirement options of millions of Americans for decades to come.
A story we'll certainly keep following. Chloe, thanks for breaking all of that down for us.
Happy to do it, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. The Supreme Court is in the delivery room today, April 1st, 2026, as it hears oral arguments in the landmark case Trump versus Barbara. This legal battle is an expectant look at the 14th Amendment, specifically focusing on a January executive order that seeks to terminate birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants and those on temporary visas. Solicitor General D. John Sauer argued that the jurisdiction clause was never meant to deliver citizenship to those without permanent ties to the country. On the other side, the ACLU says the administration is out of order, contending the move defies over 125 years of settled law and the 1898 precedent set in United States v. Wong Kim Ark. While lower courts have blocked the order, a ruling in favor of the White House could fundamentally labor the American social contract, potentially leaving 255,000 infants annually in a state of legal limbo. A final decision is expected to be born by the end of the term in late June or early July. Moving from the courtroom to the fuel pump, the president is fueling international tension by telling our allies to go get their own oil. This slick move marks a historic retreat from the United States' role as a guarantor of global energy security. After the United Kingdom and France refused to join military strikes against Iran, which have effectively clogged the Strait of Hormuz, the president issued a straightforward ultimatum: buy American energy or find the courage to secure those waters yourself. With 20% of the world's oil handled in that region, prices have surged past $6 a gallon in parts of the country. While the administration says it may wind down its offensive within 2 to 3 weeks, Spanish officials have labeled the conflict illegal, leaving our international relationships on rather thin ice. It is a stellar day for NASA as they prepare to moon the world with the launch of the Artemis II mission. Scheduled for 6:24 this evening, this 10-day mission will carry 4 astronauts, including Jeremy Hansen and Christina Koch, on a lunar flyby that will break the human distance record from Earth, previously held by Apollo 13. Ground teams are currently finishing tanking operations to fill the rocket with propellant, and despite some atmospheric pressure regarding new federal mandates on how diversity is reported, meteorologists say the weather is 80% go for launch. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice is being accused of cleaning house a bit too thoroughly. A new investigation reveals that Attorney General Pam Bondi has overseen the closure of more than 23,000 criminal cases without prosecution in just 6 months. Resources are being shifted toward immigration enforcement, which has left investigations into white-collar crime, nursing home abuse, and cryptocurrency fraud out in the cold. Prosecutors were reportedly given a 10-day window to review and drop cases opened before October 2022. Finally, we have reached the end of the line for World Cup qualifying, and some soccer giants have been kicked to the curb. Iraq has secured the 48th and final spot for the 2026 tournament after a 2-1 victory over Bolivia. While Iraq celebrates its first qualification since 1986, Italy is singing the blues once again, missing their 3rd consecutive tournament after a 4-1 penalty loss to Bosnia and Herzegovina. The field of 48 is now set for a June 11th kickoff. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.